In the last video, we showed you how to set up the plugin service and how to install plugins. Starting from a FreeNAS installation at that same point, we're going to look at the individual options for configuring each of the plugins, and then configuring them to work together in an automated streaming media pipeline. First, we're going to configure transmission, as it's one of the more common ways to obtain media. Let's take a look at our dataset configuration. We'll do a little bit of configuration on our media dataset, which is the one we'll be downloading files to. The default configuration for this dataset is correct for all potential use cases, and the actual permissions configuration for plugins is going to take place in the jail later on. I am going to make one change before moving on. I'll assign ownership of the dataset to the user I want to connect to the share over CIFS, which is useful functionality for transmission's watch directory and other media sharing tasks that work better with direct access. Once the permissions are correctly set, we can move over to configuration of the CIFS service. We'll configure CIFS under Services, and just do a basic configuration to demonstrate the functionality we're looking for. I'll configure the guest user to be the same as the owner of the dataset, and set a few more general options. This is not a very secure way to share files over CIFS. For more on how to secure your CIFS shares, please refer to our video on configuring shares. No other options should be necessary. Now we'll set up our share briefly and point it at the media dataset. Afterward, enable the CIFS service. To expose those directories to the transmission service, we're going to need a mount point. Before we can create a mount point, we'll need target directories inside and outside the jail. Since we've just set up CIFS, a handy way to test if the service is configured properly is to connect to it through our desktop. I'll connect to FreeNAS through my desktop file browser and create a directory called Downloads, and then a blank text file called transmission.log. Now we need to do the same thing in our jail. Back in the FreeNAS web GUI, open the web console. Jail asks to find your JID, then JExec your preferred shell, TCSH in my case. We're going to make dir user downloads in the jail before we go back and add our mount point. It's important to do everything in this order because when the mount point is made, the directory in the jail will inherit the permissions of the dataset. Back in the options for the plugin service, go ahead and add the mount point, and configure it so that the source is the downloads directory in our media dataset, and the destination is the user downloads directory we just made in the jail. Once the mount point is added, open the web shell again, JExec a shell, and now we'll reset our permissions on our directory. First, I'll change the owner and group by using the command chown 1001 transmission user downloads. Since my user doesn't exist in the jail, I have to give my UID as the argument. It's important that this be the same user that has access to the CIFS share so that you can add and delete files in the directory. If transmission owns the directory of both user and group, the only way to modify files from CIFS is 777 permissions, which is insecure. Next, the permissions with the command chmod 775 user downloads, which will give my user and the transmission group read-write-execute permissions and lockdown access for other. Finally, back in FreeNAS, we need to configure transmission. In the side tree menu, under Services, Plugins, we click on the options for transmission, and then configure it to use the directories we've just created as well as the log file. Notice that I also changed my watch directory to be the same as the downloads directory. This will give me the ability to drop torrent files directly into the downloads directory and have the transmission service automatically pick them up and start downloads. This is useful in cases where you have file sharing access but not RPC access. It's generally faster to upload through the transmission web GUI. One more thing we'll want to do in the transmission configuration is make sure RPC is enabled so that we can manage the transmission plugin from a browser. This is optional but enormously helpful functionality to have. Again, I haven't gone to great lengths to secure transmission, but it's best to enter a password and work out the best security settings for your network. Once finished with configuration, we can open a new tab and navigate to the IP of our jail, :9091. The transmission web GUI will load up and give us a host of management options and the ability to watch torrents in progress. It is possible to upload torrents through this interface, which can be handy or more convenient if the CIFS method is unavailable to you. For example, if you're at work and want to start downloading a torrent at home, it may be easiest to connect to RPC and upload the file through the web GUI. By this time, you should be able to either drop a torrent into the watch directory over CIFS, or just upload it through the web GUI. The files will start downloading to the directory that you specified earlier. I'll start downloading a music album from clearbits.net. which is an excellent resource for free legal torrents. While the download is going, I'll configure Firefly and MiniDLNA. Both of these are very straightforward compared to transmission. First, I'll configure Firefly. In the options, I'll set Firefly to look for media in the transmission downloads directory by changing its MP3 directory. It will find anything regardless of how nested it is, and stream it to any media player that understands the protocol. The other options are very self-explanatory, and the only other really important one is scan type. Normal scans the first MP3 frame to try to calculate size and should be accurate for most files except for some VBR files. Aggressive checks the bit rates of 10 frames in the middle of the song and is more accurate but slower. Painfully Aggressive walks through the entire song, counting the number of frames, which will be accurate but takes the most time. Next, MiniDLNA. This is a little bit more complicated, but very much the same theory. Setting the friendly name is a good idea. We then set the directories that are the target of MiniDLNA's scans, and then it can also be a good idea to check scan on start. Now that all our plugins are configured properly, let's check on the progress of our torrent. When finished, our downloaded album should stream directly to our music player. Any other media should be viewable by XBMC or anything else that speaks to DLNA. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please visit the forums at forums.freenas.org.